Hello, everybody, and welcome to 3 Point Perspective, the podcast about illustration, how to do it, how to make a living at it, and how to make an impact in the world with your art. I'm Jake Parker.
I'm Lee White.
And I'm Will Terry. And all three of us are professional illustrators. And we've all been working for about the last 25 years. We've worked with just about every major publisher in the business. We've published somewhere between 50 and 100 books, and we've all taught illustration at university.
That is correct. Each week we pick a different topic in illustration and give you the best advice available on the interwebs and podcast world.
Great. We knocked that one out.
Wow. Let's quit right now. Let's just call this podcast number. Is this number 60?
No, is it? I think it is.
This is our 60th one.
Oh, congratulations, guys.
Yeah,
we really stuck with it.
Let's be done right now. Perfect. We all agree.
Now,
we all agree on everything.
Every episode, this is someone's first episode listening to us. Isn't that weird to think?
Yeah.
Every single new episode, somebody new is listening. So
you think so? Like somebody's actually tuning in on this one and has not heard of us before.
Yes.
And so this is the first one. God,
right.
now I feel nervous.
Don't feel nervous. They're going to hear our witty banter. They're going to hear our expert advice, and they're going to come away having learned something new. So,
and we're never boring.
I don't know.
I listened to one the other day, and I was like,
I listen to our podcast to go to bed at night. It puts me right out.
You guys have never listened to our podcast.
I listen every now and then.
Honestly.
I listen to like the first 10 minutes.
Okay.
You know what's funny is that when I plug my phone into my car, it automatically, because I have like an episode or two on iTunes, it automatically just starts playing the podcast, and it drives me crazy because it's us testing our mics and stuff. It's not even a real episode.
It's not even an edited version of the podcast.
No, it's just the raw audio. It's horrible.
I love how Alex edits in our mistakes a lot of times too.
Yeah, he keeps them in false starts just for fun.
Uh-huh.
We have false starts.
Not today.
No, not today. Today's perfect.
It's not too late. We could mess something up.
Well, before we do that, let's get into. Do we want to like a little update on what everybody's been working on? I think that'd be fun to know. Will, what are you?
Let's do it. Let's keep it quick then.
I'm going to say this. My Kickstarter is probably live right now.
Nuh-uh.
Yeah.
Oh.
What do you mean probably live? You don't know?
Well, I haven't launched it yet, but by the time that this podcast
I
makes it out there.
That thing.
That was so confusing. Okay.
Yeah.
We should tell people when we're recording this mid-May. So
when does this one air, Jake? When is it now?
This one's in, I think, the early July is where we're at.
Kickstarter's running.
No, it's late July. This is late July.
Ooh, hopefully it's not over. But if you missed it, there will be opportunities. So still go there.
Just
because
briefly tell us what the Kickstarter is all about. We got feedback apparently that we talked too much at the beginning.
Yeah, that we should not talk about our projects for too long. It's too much what was described as navel gazing is what the person said.
Well, it's a business book for illustrators, and it's basically a marketing book. It's how to make money in the real world. And the book is called What They Don't Teach in Art School.
Beautiful.
I love it.
There you go.
That's going to do well, I think. I think people, once they realize that we're actually giving real advice and not just like the stock thing, then they're going to be all over that.
Mm-hmm.
I hope so.
What about you, Lee?
I just wrapped up all of my illustration projects, and now I am shifting gears into a fine art career. So it's a huge, huge week for me. I just turned in all my stuff on Friday. So now I'm sort of free, and I'm looking at a whole new kind of world in illustration and image making and shifting the business over. So it's fun. It's really interesting.
What happens if next week your agent is like, Lee, I got the book for you. It's a story. And it's right up your alley. It's about a girl who wants the best birthday cake, and it's got animals. It's got little bicycles.
Cats everywhere.
Cats everywhere. Are you going to say yes or no?
I don't know. I'd probably turn it down. I am still taking book covers because I love them so much. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, I'm kind of shifting gears. I'm going to start teaching a little more with technique and natural media. So there may be by this time by the time this thing airs, a Patreon where I'm going to show you guys demos and all kinds of techniques for different media and the drawbacks and pros and cons for each of the media. And so I'm going to be working to get that going, and then starting to just make images that I want to make, and then see what happens.
Cool. Very nice.
What about you?
I had a couple of freelance concept art jobs come in through the pipeline there. The pipeline, what even is that? I got emailed from some people.
And so that was the one you were doing, the character that you sent us the other day, where we were critiquing it.
Yes.
Is that right?
So that's for a card game, an actual board/card game. I'm doing some designs for that. And then another one I can't talk about, but it's for a animated series that will be coming out later in the year.
There's two things in illustration, two things that make you feel really cool. And one of them is saying my agent. You remember when you first got an agent?
Yeah.
And then you just say, no, I've got to run this past my agent. And the second thing is mentioning a project that you can't discuss because it's two-sided. It's almost like you're employed by NASA or the Secret Service.
Yes.
You don't have clearance for that information.
Speaking of that, that is cool. That is super. But you do actually sign NDAs, non-disclosure
I know.
things, so you can't.
I just don't honor them.
So check this out. Back in 1991, I think it was, I was a teenager or young teenager, and the Gulf War had just sort of kicked into gear, and it was on all the news and all the newspapers. And one aspect, the coolest part for me, was the unveiling of new technology, the stealth technology, right? That they have this stealth bomber and they have this stealth fighter, and no one had ever seen anything like this before. And I, as like this kid who loved science fiction, was like, oh my gosh, this is science fiction reality. That's so cool. Okay, so this has to do with what we were talking about. It was like, okay, where is Jake going with this?
He has left the building.
So listen,
okay.
I just thought it was a cool thing. My best bud, Steve, his older brother is an engineer. He's probably retired now, but he had been working on some projects for the military, but he would always say, I can't tell you what I'm working on. I can't tell you what I'm working on. And we're like, oh, what is it? What are you working on? What's so secret? Well, this news came out about the stealth bomber, and he said he called his mom. He's all, hey, did you see the news? She's all, yeah. So that's what I've been working on. And it turns out, turns out he was designing like the cockpit for I think the actual chairs that the pilots sit in. His sort of project was, I don't know, ejection or something like that, how to get them safely out of the cockpit without, before it crashes. So I just thought that was the coolest thing ever.
That is so cool. I can't believe people are doing that. While we're working on our dumb little stories, somebody is building a stealth fighter.
Right.
Well, they're destroying the world. We're building the world.
That's true.
It's keeping the world safe, Will.
Hey, somebody's got to design that thing too.
It costs a lot of money to keep the world safe. It takes a lot of engineers, a lot of brains. Anyways, let's talk about illustration.
Illustration. All right, so this one's my topic, and every now and again we come back around. I like to peruse the forums, the SVSLearn forums, and just kind of gather some general questions that I see over and over. I do have some specific ones, but they kind of hit, I see a couple of people posting about this stuff. And so hopefully you guys will find this entertaining. I got a bunch of different questions, so let's go ahead and dive into it. This one's from Rachel. She says, I feel like I'm getting into a better way of working recently. I religiously do my 50 thumbnails. Thumbs up for that.
Wow,
and this definitely helps a lot. That said, sometimes I'll have a thumbnail that she likes, and I'll do a sketch that I'm also feel happy with. I check with people around me. There's nothing too weird looking. And then I get to do the final piece, and there's something just feels wrong with it. I'd be interested to know if this happens to anyone else, and what do I do about it?
So basically, there's a some sort of visual dissonance between the thumbnail and the final drawing, right? Okay. I get that all the time. And
Everybody does, I think.
yeah. So like, it's Rachel. Is
Rachel.
that her name? Yeah. So she is basically dealing with what artists like are dealing with. So she's it's nothing out of the ordinary here. And in fact, I think if you are magically able to make a final illustration look as cool as your thumbnail, then you have reached like the upper levels of animation, or not animation, illustration. I think what's going on here is two things. Number one is your thumbnail can be so loose and so almost symbolic that your brain is like making up for all of everything that it lacks, right? So you're suggesting stuff, your brain's filling in the gaps, and you can kind of get the gist of what it is. There's a lot of energy there because there's nothing sort of nailed down. So your brain's deciding between lines, and it's picking, maybe even the line that's not on the page, but it's putting this image together. When you go to final, you actually have to nail things down, and you have to make decisions, and things do just become naturally a little bit stiffer, a little bit sometimes more lifeless, right? And the way that I combat that and I battle that is I actually use my thumbnails as like I'll actually scan them in if I'm doing them traditionally, or if I'm drawing them digitally, blow them up to the size that the final drawing is actually going to be, and then I draw exactly over the top of those. So I'm not reinterpreting my thumbnail, and that gets me a little bit closer than if I was to reinterpret the thumbnail just by looking at it and trying to draw it bigger. Is that what you guys do?
Yeah. I think, well,
yeah, I totally agree with that. The other thing that I was going to say is, and this is probably not going to be a very satisfying answer, but the more the better your work gets over years, the more you've seen different compositions and thumbnails and value patterns, and the more you see that, the more your mind can see it as a finish in the thumbnail stage. So if I come up with a good thumbnail or a comp, I can, and I'm talking, and I've really spent some good time whittling down and getting it where I want it to be, I can see the finish and I can see it. And maybe there's something to being positive about it. Because when you're positive about something, things tend to turn out better than when you're negative about it. If you're in your mind, you're going, I don't know how this is going to turn out. And,
right.
Then you're kind of giving yourself an out for it to not get there. But I see a thumbnail that I've done, the one that I pick, and I'm at the point now where it always turns out. I remember a few stages, a few decades ago, where, I would do a thumbnail and I had no idea how the finish was going to turn out. I'm like, I hope this one turns out, I was in that stage.
Yeah.
And sometimes they would, and sometimes they would go south, and I didn't know why. And that's a big part of it, is if you're in the stage where you're not sure if it's going to turn out, in my opinion, you just haven't done enough. You haven't made enough images. You haven't had enough failures to figure out why they don't turn out sometimes.
Right.
Yep.
And then you solve that, and to me, making a really good image is a lot. What's just as important about making good images is what you put down. It's the pitfalls and the problems you avoid. The stuff that you avoid in the planning stages, I think you're like, when I look at Lee's work, I'm like, he's assembling an illustration. It's like it's an assembly process. It's not just I sit down and I just draw something and it's great. It's an assembly. That's the design and the drawing together, where you're bringing in elements, reducing sizes. I saw your thumbnails the other day for a book project, and you're being careful. You're with concept and with design, you're saying what would be the best thing to do here.
Yeah, I think you're right. After a certain amount of time, you start to avoid it. Like if I have a light character, I don't put it over a light background, because I know immediately I've introduced a massive problem that's hard to solve as an illustration solve. It's a value solve, and you have to. I mean, you can if you're just a total pro, you can do a light character on a light background or a dark character on a dark background. But man, you got your work cut out for you. If you're a beginner, you are in big trouble once you set those things up. And so I think that's true. I also agree with what Jake said. In going from the transition from the thumbnail to the finish, there's a couple things that happens. One, I think people go from too loose to too tight in that big jump. I like drawing on top of my sketchy thumbnails like Jake does. So if it's digital, it's easy. If it's traditional, I actually blow up and print that crappy sketch. I mean, I'll take a 3-inch sketch and blow it up to like 16 by 20. And it looks horrible, but at least it still has that quality that I really like. Yeah. But sometimes it's hard. It's hard for people to do that. And if you have a little loose thumbnail that's 3 inches tall, and you have a big 16 by 20 board, and you're like, okay, I'm going to do a clean version of that from scratch on a blank piece of paper. There's no way. I mean, I couldn't do it. Will can't do it. Jake can't do it. So to think that you could do it with less experience than we have is probably futile. And the other thing that I learned a time ago was working with when I first got into watercolor. I was dying because it's so hard. It's still hard for me. But one big moment was when it came time to do the final. I just said it's a sketch. I've talked about this process on the podcast before, so you guys have heard it. But the second I started saying, I got a really cool thumbnail, got a nice little color study, I'm going to do the final. But I just say, hey, this is just a practice one. Because tension is most people's problem, like Will said, where you start to tighten up. Oh my God, I'm doing the final, and this one better be good. I hope it's great. That is going to cause you to just stiffen up, and everything's going to be stiff because you got all this tension and all this pressure on you. So if everything's just a practice, then you're free to play. And then if you mess up, well, it doesn't matter. It's just practice and do it again.
That's cool.
Hey, for those that are following us on YouTube, they might be able to see this. I'm sharing my screen. This is an image from Jim Madsen that he just posted on Facebook this week.
Look at that belt buckle. Yeah.
But look at, you were talking about how it's hard to do a light character on a light background or dark on dark. And he's got this, his cowboy character's got a white hat, on a cloud background, on a white cloud. And he just, with lighting, he's solved it, with light and shadow.
Yeah, dark cloud. He made the cloud dark, and then he put the sunshine hitting the light hitting the hat, which made the hat light. So a light shape on basically a medium tone cloud.
And then the dark. Yeah, such a pro. Hard to do. Yeah.
He also set himself up difficult because it's all ambient lighting and indirect bounced light.
Yep.
That's another pro move. If you're a beginner or intermediate, don't do one where there's no direct lighting on your character. But once you get to be that advanced level, try some where there's no direct light hitting your subject. This one's amazing with his shifts of cool and warm. You see all those in the face. You got those cools from the sky, warms from the ground. Pretty cool.
Our YouTube channel, by the way, is Society of Visual Storytelling.
Yeah,
so
check it out.
Check it out there.
Yeah.
We'll have a link.
But anyway, so if you guys are struggling, know that everyone struggles going from the thumbnail to finish. Like Will said. If you can match it perfectly what's in your head, then you're better than 99% of people.
All right. What's the next question?
Okay, next one. This is actually a good one for us three. It says, I keep entering the contest, but I never make, this is anonymous because I'm not going to call them out. I keep entering the contest, but I never make the top 16. What should I do? So I'd like to maybe point out, I mean, we can't speak specifically to everybody because, there's every kind of entry, but maybe the top 5 or 6 things that we see over and over in the contest. This is the contest that we run monthly at SVSLearn.com, and it's a different theme every month. We alternate on who picks the theme, so they kind of rotate in our individual personalities in the subject matter. But what are some of the main things you guys see? How could somebody brush up and maybe get into that top 16?
I will tell you there's 2 things that immediately disqualify. And number one is a low level of rendering ability, right? So if if the quality just isn't there on the rendering, a character design is a little off. It just doesn't look, the trees, or maybe not, if there's trees in it or environment, it just isn't well thought through and delivered upon. The characters aren't working with the environment. It just looks a little bit unpolished. Then it's an immediate no. The second thing is, does it capture the story of the prompt? So we have the prompt, and it's usually, a lot of what we do is illustrative storybook type of prompts. Like this last month was Lisa's robot invention worked great until it started doing this. Right. So you get an image in your head already, like, oh, what does her robot look like? And there were so many we passed on because we couldn't tell what the robot was doing wrong. Or we could tell what the robot was doing wrong, but we couldn't tell what the robot was designed for, in the first place. Or, so it's just like not getting the prompt across. So conceptually, they either don't work, or visually, it just looks on a more amateur level. But I'd like to hear Will go into a little bit deeper on the visual side.
Can I talk about the story side first?
No. No, of course you can.
Well, so I think what people don't do is, when you talk about, they'll come up with a concept and we're like, it doesn't really illustrate the theme, is a couple things. One, they don't write the rest of the story. So if it's a prompt, my suggestion would be, go ahead and physically write out the whole scene of what's happening. Make a description so that you really understand why the character's motivated. If it doesn't make sense to the viewer, if it's missing, it's like a joke that's not funny, or when kids make up a joke sometimes, and you laugh because they're kids, but it's really not funny because it doesn't make sense in the real world, because characters, the motivations are not believable.
I actually had to outlaw jokes in my house because they were getting so dumb and so not funny, just not even trying. I said, guys, you could do jokes only on Saturdays. Only on Saturdays.
I made up a joke last week. You remember my Snoop Dogg joke? Can I do it? Can I do another one? I got one dad joke per week. I made these up. These are not read off of a joke book or anything. I've got one for you. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Why did
it's going to be done.
Why does the roof have trouble with long-term relationships?
Because it's on fire.
It's got trust issues.
Trust issues.
Oh boy!
Wow.
That was
thought of that at Home Depot.
Okay, keep going, Will.
You hate to see it, Jake. Yeah, so that would be the one thing is really before you start drawing or illustrating anything is writing the story, the rest of the story for your characters, and it's got to be clever, it's got to be funny. Mm-hmm. Or clever or funny, but it's got to communicate something that is believable and that people can understand. Mm-hmm. People can't have false motivations and have the concept convey.
Yep.
As far as visual goes, my thing there is you're competing against people that have been doing this for anywhere from 1 year to 5 years to 10 years to maybe even 20 years, and there really is a correlation. If everyone and I used to do this in my illustration classes, I would say if you're in college, it's your junior year, and everyone in here has drawn and / painted or created art projects for different amounts of time, and if everyone had a little sign above their head that said how many hours they had into drawing and painting, you would see, you'd probably see as few as 50 or 100 hours, and you'd probably see clear up to 5,000 or in the thousands. And I would tell my class, I'm like, if we could all see the hours that we've all put in, you would also, everyone in here knows who the best artists are because we've already done maybe a few assignments and you've already got to see everybody's work. Guess what? Those numbers would correlate to who's the best, almost always.
Right. That's true.
So if you're not making it into this competition, give yourself a break in the fact that you'll probably have less time into it than the people that are getting picked most often. So the answer there is you got to stick with it. If you want to get picked, you got to get more time in so that it might be 6 months, it might be a year, it might be 2 years, but eventually you're getting picked. Same happened for me in my illustration career. I was up for assignments all the time where they'd say, hey, we're thinking about you for a project, but we're also looking at a few other illustrators. And in the beginning, I never got the project. So I'd tell my wife, hey, I'm up for this job. It pays, $10,000 or $8,000 or $15,000 or whatever. And she finally said, don't tell me about them anymore. I'm tired of getting my hopes
get all
up.
excited.
Yeah, because I would never get them. And then it got to a point where now I almost always get them. If someone tells me we're looking at a few illustrators, they'll often say, you're our first choice, just so you know. So if you have time in your schedule, we want you to do it. So it just changes over time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, one of the guys who won last month, and I'm so glad that our when we do these contests, me and Jake and Will do not pick the winners. We have it set up as a sort of a March Madness tournament style, and the audience votes. And so we don't pick any of the winners, but one of the winners that won last month and the month before, I worked with that guy for like 4 years. And so I'm glad the audience picks because it would look like I'm playing favorites. But the 4 years that I worked with him was like 6 years ago. So that's 10 years that this person's been a serious artist.
Yeah.
Up to this point.
Yeah, and it's really cool. We've never seen any other school really do an arena style.
Yeah, it's artist against artist. It's image against image, and you pick, hey, do I like A or do I like B? And it is so much fun to watch because you never know which one's going to win. Sometimes I think one's going to win. And
then we physically move the image up on the ladder to the next spot. So you start with 16 to the grade 8 to the final 4, and then the semifinals, and then.
That has been such a fun format. I'm glad. And then nobody yells at me because when I used to judge the contest, people would I'd get emails the next day saying about how terrible of a judge I am. So it's pretty good. One thing I want to add to this discussion about entering. So I agree with what Will's saying about figuring out really what you want to show, what the scene's about, writing it all out. That's great advice. What I'd like to add to that is once you've done that and you sketch it out, show it to somebody who does not know what you're drawing. Yes. Because especially this past month, Jake and I liked a couple of the images. Me and Jake were judging them, and we just couldn't tell what was happening. It was ambiguous or really vague, and we were trying to piece like, oh, is that person doing something? We just couldn't tell what was happening. And so you should at least, if you show them to somebody, they should be able to tell what's happening.
Yep. And it is a sign of a pro who is able to show it to people knowing that there are going to be changes. I mean, you guys both told me, you looked at one of my pieces a few weeks ago and were like, I would do this differently. And I want it to be the best that it can be. So I'm going to make those changes. If you're caught in a situation in your mind where you don't want to show it to someone because you think it's going to create extra work for you, then you're not ready yet for what it takes to create great work. I mean, like that's
the thing is you don't have to spend 8 hours on a piece before you show it to somebody. Like you could show them the sketch version, the somewhat almost polished sketch, so that you don't spend all this time rendering out something that's incomprehensible.
Right.
You just get to the point where someone looking at it can tell what's going on. Maybe it doesn't have color on it.
Yeah.
And that's good practice anyway for submitting to clients. So when I'm submitting new work to a client that I haven't worked with before, I tend to polish the finish a little more than I do with clients that I've worked with before because they already understand what I'm doing.
Right.
But if it's a new one, you got to have different levels you can take the image to. And I like to use like a scale of 5, like 1 being a really loose thumbnail and 5 being a perfect rendering. I'm like, am I going to take it to a level 3, a level 4, level 2? Think about what each one of those would look like. But it's great to have 2 or 3 people to be able to bounce ideas off of. Me and Jake and Will bounce thumbnails off of each other, and that's proven really beneficial. Also, David Hone, I actually texted him and said, I got this idea. I'm doing this book cover. I'd love to see just a thumbnail and just have him say, it could just be a scribble almost on how he would interpret this idea. And he sent me over this like nice little thumbnail. And I didn't use his exactly, but I was able to use information he gave me. So if you develop a little network of people that you trust, it's definitely beneficial to use that network.
Yeah.
I don't think enough people do that. What do you guys think?
It's hard because if you've invested, 10 or 20 hours into a piece, you don't typically you want to be done. You want to look back at your piece. The thing is, someone can, if you show it to one person, they can give you bad advice. But to me, my criteria is usually if I show someone, it's something I was already thinking and I just didn't want to go through and do the work, and to have them reaffirm it is just like, yep, I need to do it. And that's what you guys did. I was like, I think this foreground area needs to be darker. And you guys are like, the foreground area needs to be darker. And I'm like, got it. Good.
Yeah.
Now I can move forward with confidence to do a little more work on it.
I should ask, watch out for showing people that have a history of making you feel bad about yourself. I don't want to get too psychological here, but like showing, like even when I show my mom stuff now, she'll say something that's supposed to be a compliment, and I end up feeling horrible about it.
Don't ask your exes.
Even significant others. I know David Hone, his wife's a designer, and she's sharp, and so he's like, I'm not showing her. She'll just like crush it. And my wife's the same way. She picks out the character. Like there's always something I show her. She's like, oh, that's really cool. And I just wait 1 second. I know she's going to say something about the character. And I'm like, oh, the character doesn't look right. Like, I'm not showing you anymore.
And make sure they've had a good night's sleep before you ask them out at the end of the day. And make sure that you haven't done something to really piss them off first.
I guess it's a good point. Watch out for the people that you want to show stuff to, where really what you're looking for is just them to say, hey, that's awesome. You're not really looking for a critique.
Right.
That's what I want my wife for. I want her to just think I'm great. I don't want her to really look at my character and tell me what's wrong with it.
I think that's true, though. When asking for critique, like first know yourself. Do you just need to be validated? Or are you actually looking for, how can you improve and get this better?
Right.
And be honest with that too, up front with the person you're asking, saying, hey, I just need you to acknowledge that I worked hard on this.
But leave it alone. Don't mess with it.
Don't say anything.
I'm not going to change anything on it.
Right. I just want you to be happy that I worked.
And I have a friend where we do that with each other, where he'll send me something. He's a screenwriter. He'll send me like a script he worked on. He's like, don't need any changes or anything on it. I just need you to acknowledge that I did a good job on this. And I'll do the same to him.
That is hilarious. I've never actually parsed the differences between actually wanting feedback and wanting validation. It's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good point.
So let me ask another related question to this. There's a handful of people who every month make it to the top 18 or the top 19. And then we have to go through and weed out those 3 or 2 that just aren't quite there. What usually gets that person disqualified? These are people who maybe their piece looks just as good as the one that does get qualified. What's the difference between the two?
I mean, it could be rendering or it could be the concept, but it seems like for me, I'll forgive a lot of rendering lack of rendering ability if the concept is really strong. Mm-hmm. If it just makes you laugh and you're like, this is perfect. We showed an example of that a couple months ago.
Mm-hmm. Thinking of the ones that me and Jake pulled out the past 2 times, I think composition is the problem at that point. Because a lot of times it's like, oh, that's a cool character. Oh, that concept's pretty funny. Oh man, that composition is terrible. Like it's just real flat to the viewer on one single plane, no foreground, middle ground, background. Interesting relationships. It's just all on the even kind of mid plane.
You're right. Yeah.
That one tends to happen a lot. I do want to say this to finish this up. I made myself a little note. Keep entering, even if you guys are not placing. The placing is always fun, and it's always a great, little gold star for your ego. But keep entering, because there is a huge benefit to saying, this is as good as I've got right now. Even if it doesn't make the top 16 or the top 18 or even, higher. Just putting it out there and doing that over and over, I think changes you as an artist versus people who always say, oh, I'm not going to get top 16, so I'm not going to enter. And then they just hold on to all these kind of half-done images. When you enter something, you have to finish that last 20%, which is it's a grind, that last 20%, in my opinion, to finish an image. It's too easy to stop at 80% and say, oh, I'm not good enough.
Which do you want at the end of the year? 12 finished pieces that may not have made it to the top 16, or 12 or 6 half-finished pieces because you gave up and thought, well, I'll never make it to the top 16, so why should I even try? I guarantee that the artist who does the 12 sticks with it is going to be a qualifier in year 2, and maybe even a winner in year 2, or they're just, the way you progress is by what Lee's saying, is actually going through and finishing things.
It's hard. All right.
It is hard, but worth it.
Definitely. All right, this next one is from Corey. It says, love the show. Thanks for making it. My question is about pricing your art. Mr. Jake Parker recently sold some originals on his website. I couldn't figure out his method of pricing. Some were $40, some were $600. It didn't appear based on anything. Maybe popularity of the subject matter. It's a question. Anyway, if it fits into a future topic, I'd love to hear you guys discuss how you price artwork.
Great. Well, I'll speak to this one since he called me out specifically. I did recently have a original art sale on my website. I put up 24 original drawings that I had done over the last couple of years. And I used to do original art sales like every 6 months, and I kind of took a couple of years off just because, it's a little bit of work to get it together, and I've been doing all kinds of other busy stuff. But finally, it had accumulated enough, and I realized, for me personally, I could sell this art, I could make some money, and that's one level of it. The other level is it's just sitting in a flat file in my office, and I rarely look at this stuff. And I know that there's people out there who would want it, want to own it, want to frame it, want to put it on their wall, it would be more admired and of better use to the world, or to one person individually, if it's sold and it's in another home. So that's like the two sort of driving factors is it's doing no use, just sitting here, and I can make some money off it. So how do I price them? Well, if you paid a little closer attention, you'll notice that all the ones that were $40, $50 were small postcard size drawings, and everything 100 up above were either 8.5 by 11 or larger. And so a lot of times when you're pricing artwork is you figure out what a square inch is worth. Is it $10 per square inch? Is it $5 per square inch, or whatever? If you have 100 square inch drawing, then automatically that's going to be $1,000 piece, right? If it's $10 per square inch. And so I kind of use a little bit of that model. It's not scientific, though. If you own a gallery, you do really get very specific about that. You figure out a price per square inch for the artist that you're working with, and then do the math for all the pieces. So that's part of it. Is smaller pieces are going to be a little bit cheaper. Larger pieces are going to be a lot more. Color pieces are going to be more than black and white pieces. Any sort of mixed media or special media that I use. So I used one was a postcard size, but it had special silver paint on it, or gold paint, I think it was. This reflective watercolor paint that I got. And so I charged more for that one because it looked cooler. And it took a little more time to put together than just a ink and marker one. So that's another factor. And then the subject matter is another factor. I could charge more for a fan art of Baby Yoda than I could of one of my original pieces, probably, So I had a Baby Yoda drawing there. I had a Jack Skellington drawing there, and I charged a little bit more for those since I knew I was tapping into a fan base. And there's people who collect Jack Skellington stuff. They have, pins, they have posters, they have toys, they have desk sculptures, they have prints, and if they see an original piece of art, they're going to want that too. So,
is there any for sure selling piece that you, in terms of subject matter, that if I paint this thing and it has this subject matter in it, it'll sell? Is it Jack Skellington?
Baby Yoda.
Would Baby Yoda be that?
Baby,
you think?
Baby Yoda, I set for $300, and it did not last very long at all.
That's cheap though. How big was the painting?
It was just 8.5 by 11. It was a ink and marker.
Oh,
drawing.
On paper?
Yeah, on paper. So all these were drawings. They weren't really paintings. And then the other thing, I wanted a range there, $40 on the low end. I think the most expensive one was $600. I wanted a range to fit different budgets because I did want people who maybe didn't have the budget to spend over $100, that they would just have an option to purchase something. So that was another factor. And then another factor, there's so many things going on in this. I wanted to have a handful of very affordable pieces so that when somebody came there, they saw that would sell really quick. So when somebody came there and saw that things were already selling out, it would motivate them to want to make a decision to buy instead of waiting and seeing, So I think that helped a little bit too.
That's
what's that?
All right, I'm going to clean up the slop
fear of loss.
I'm going to clean up the slop that Jake just left out there. Everything Jake said is right. I'm going to organize it in your head because that was all over the place. But I do agree with everything that he just said. So I set mine up for different levels. So what Jake said is very important about having different price points. And how do you do that? So some thought needs to be put in there. But before I go through my price points, the thing that I want to recommend to you guys is the two things that are going to dictate how much your work sells for. One is your reputation. How long have you been doing it, and how well known within that market are you? And then your scale and your media and all that stuff is going to be the second contributing factor. So like if you just start painting and you're as good as Jake, Jake's still going to sell for probably a little bit more because he's been doing it longer or he's more well known. So that really factors in if you're showing in galleries too. I mean, I could show the same size painting as somebody next to me and they'll make 100,000 more than me because of how long that they've been there. But anyway, I like what Jake said about the different price points. So for me, I built basically 4 different levels of pricing, and I'll list them out here, and you guys you don't have to use my price points, but just think about where this work lies. So level 1 is my lowest price stuff, and that is going to be reproductions and prints. And I start at just a greeting card, which is $4, and I go all the way up to a 16 by 20 print, which is $75. And so I have a couple of different sizes in between there, but that's my low-end stuff, and most people, that is for almost everybody, and that tends to be like a quick bread and butter type product, and it's easy to do and doesn't require a lot from me either. Level 2 is easier for me to do, but it has some customization. That is drawings, basically, and that's just with a pencil for me, but could be marker. Maybe this would be where Jake would put a marker kind of thing. And mine goes from $200 to $350 at the level 2. And so that goes up a little bit from my reproductions. And so that's the important thing, is just kind of seeing how these stack on each other. Reproductions are cheap. Drawings are a little more expensive, but still fairly affordable. Level 3 for me is monoprints, or something that has like one color on it and is a little bit more complicated than a drawing, but not a full-scale painting. And so as we go up, the price goes up, and the customization goes up a little bit too. And those monoprints go up to about $500 for me. And then level 4 is actual paintings, and these are framed typically, and they go from a small 10 by 10, which I sell for $400, all the way up to a 30 by 40, which is $3,000. And I have those broken down into like 5 different sizes. And so it's pretty cool if somebody's looking at a painting, says, oh, I'd love to be able to afford an original. I'll be like, oh, well, come over, check out these, and these might fit your budget or whatever. And so, each one stacks on, and a lot of times I'll have a person start at level 1, they'll buy a card, then they'll buy a print, then they'll buy a monoprint or a drawing, and then they'll buy a frame painting later. And so it's an evolution of a customer, basically.
Very good. Thanks for cleaning up my slop.
Does that make sense? Did that make sense though on how, so hopefully somebody listening can kind of frame that for how they're doing it.
No, that's great. That's great.
Will, you want to add anything to that?
No, I don't sell original stuff. So
Yours is all reproduction, right?
all prints, yeah.
What's your price point?
My price point is low.
Are you kind of the stacking them, selling them deep and stacking them cheap kind of motto?
Yeah, I'm the cheap guy in the room.
You make a ton of money though.
How come you don't sell originals?
Because I work digitally.
Yeah, how come you don't make some
Originals?
non-digital art and sell it?
That'll come down the road.
It's a great point.
Okay.
That'll happen later on. I right now I have so many ideas and projects that I want to do that I gotta move, man. I can't mess around getting paints out.
I would think though, with the way that you work on the iPad, that it's the exact same version of doing an original. Cross hatching and stuff.
I can't do the same line work at the same size. I had a guy one time from Singapore at a show say, "Oh, do you have originals on these?" And they were printed really small, like maybe 4 inches high, but they were reduced down from like 9 inches. They were like, I rendered them double the size.
Yeah.
On digitally. And, I made it look like it was pencil work. And he's like, "Oh, is this pencil?" I'm like, "Well, I'm making it to look like pencil." "Oh, well, can you do them?" And he's like, "I could sell these all day long. If they were originals and done in pencil." And I'm like, the pencil doesn't go sharp enough.
Even a mechanical pencil with like a hard lead.
He would sell them for $400. He said each, and I'm like, with shipping and framing and all, I'd be lucky to get $150 for each one. It just wouldn't be worth it for me to
maybe
spend tedious.
I'll tell you this: when anybody asks about an image that I've done digitally, I always say I've got it as original art, and then I go home and I make it.
Right. Right. I mean, if I was talking, if he was, like, I could sell these for a few thousand each, it would be worth it to do. But just where I'm looking at making $150 to $200, I'm like, nah.
Well, especially if you're selling a ton of reproductions on it.
Right.
All right. So we beat that one up pretty good. This was from Mirka, I think is how you pronounce her name. I've finished final illustrations for a picture book waiting to be submitted to a small publisher. So it's not a self-published author, but small publisher that I'm holding on to because I haven't been paid yet. The contract had dates, but doesn't seem like the publisher really cares about the dates. They're way past the deadline. Is it acceptable to start invoicing them on a weekly basis, or what should I do? So you've done the final artwork. Looks like maybe they paid up to that point. So there might be a third or a half left, I guess, probably on the payment contract, and they're just not responding. And so I've read a little bit into this thread, and the talk was, do you keep the artwork? Do you hold on to it, sort of hold the artwork ransom and wait for the publisher to pay? Or what do you guys think? So
I think we live in a world where there are there are more illustrators willing to work than there are assignments being given out. So it's kind of a buyer's world when it comes to giving out illustration assignments. So personally, what I do in that situation, if someone is late paying, often the art director is stuck. Often the art director has nothing to do with the money, and they're being told, you got to come in on deadline. So they have all this pressure to get their layouts turned in on time. If you play hardball and say, I'm not giving you the artwork until you pay the money, one of the risks is that the art director will say, well, I like this work from this artist, but I'm not going to work with them ever again because everyone else just gives me the artwork and it's not my fault that the money is slow to come. That's one way of looking at it. And that's kind of how I've tended to handle things like that. And I've always thought, now that we have the internet, we have Facebook and social media and stuff, any company that doesn't pay is going to get destroyed on social media.
Right.
So
good point.
They're eventually going to pay, or else there should already be stuff out there on the internet that says they don't work with this client.
I gotta
God, that seems. Go ahead, Jake.
I gotta. I mean, I don't know this for sure because I haven't been on the other side, but I gotta say 9 times out of 10, they're not paying you. The reason they're not paying you isn't because they don't have the money. It's because of just paperwork and, you know, somebody forgetting to do something and contacting somebody. And it, you know, any sort of publisher has 100 different departments, and, you know, all these are, you know, everything has to be approved and sent through and checked, and a manager has to sign off. And so, I think your position and your job is to you can just remind, and eventually it'll come through. I've never had an actual professional publisher not pay.
And see, I've had it one time with, you know, somewhere around 2,500 to 3,000 jobs that I've done. Once I've had someone, and they paid half. They owed me $300 for an editorial piece. They said, we're having money problems. Can we give you half the payment, and then we'll pay the other half? I have heard that in a court of law, if you accept a partial payment, that's considered legally payment in full, because it's their
That's a weird move. I'd like to get an attorney on that one.
Yeah, and I'm not giving legal advice at all. But that's a beware of accepting a partial payment. I never got the other half, so I've never been fully stiffed.
Do you think it would be more detrimental to your career to call out a publisher for not paying? I mean, you mentioned like the kind of the rocky relationship you might have with an art director.
Right.
If you're saying, hey, you're not getting your finals, would the same thing happen if you dogged somebody on Instagram? Or?
I think if you documented your interactions, so I emailed them, they ghosted me. I emailed them again, they ghosted me. I called them, they said, oh, we're going to pay, you know, you have this documented.
Right.
If you could show a list of 10 things you tried to do politely, and if you came onto Facebook and you said, hey, you know, if you come out there going, I hate these guys, they're the worst.
Right.
Don't anybody work for them. If you did that, that's different. But if you said, hey, just want the art community to be aware, this is what's happening, this is what happened to me, I don't see how anybody would say, well, I don't want to work with them. Look at how much chance they gave this company to pay before they outed them.
Right. So as you're saying, the angle would be, hey guys, a cautionary tale instead of beating up the publisher, trying to force them to pay. Yeah.
Yeah. Using decorum. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. What do you think about maybe giving the art director low res files so they can place them and just say, I'll give you the high res files when I get paid?
That's not a bad idea.
That's not a bad idea. And I've done stuff like that for clients that are more self-publishy, like individuals that need something. I'm like, hey, here, and I can say it like that. Here's a low res for your placement. And then if they ask for the high res, I'll say, well, let's do this handoff. Let me get a hand on that money.
Well, it's amazing how irrelevant you are once you turn in final artwork. I mean, I agree with you guys. Everybody always pays. Sometimes you got to chase really hard. But I do want to add one more thing too. If you're going to be a professional illustrator, this is the way our business works, and you need to have 6 months. I recommend even a year of expenses that you can have clients do this, where it doesn't sink you. You can still pay your rent and buy groceries and things like that. If you're 1 month out from being able to pay your groceries or your rent or mortgage or whatever, that's a dangerous place to be if the client has to pay you. Otherwise, you default on your home.
Right.
So just be careful. I mean, that's why those recommendations are in place.
Yeah.
Yeah. You start to make really dumb decisions when
you get desperate. Yeah. There's another question that kind of goes along with this. I saw it on a couple of different posts. Some artists who work traditionally, when they're going to be submitting final artwork, in the days past, you would mail your artwork to the publisher, whether it's a magazine or whether it's a book publisher or whatever, and they just scan it, and all of a sudden it appears in the final publication or whatever. But now some artists are asking if they should pay for scans or should they send it in, and if they do pay for their own scans, should they bill the client for the scan? What do you guys think about that?
It's funny because photographers bill for everything.
Yeah,
You know,
they're
they
good
bill,
at it.
they're good at it. They bill for like, I traveled over here, I had a sandwich, blah blah blah.
Yep.
I had to buy an extra light for your shoot.
Yeah, that was specific. They're really good about it. But this one's a tricky one because this used to be a client payment, or excuse me, a client service. And now somehow over the past 10 years, it's sort of been pushed on illustrators where we have to deliver color correct files, even if you're working traditionally.
Yeah, I've paid for scans on my own before. I've accepted,
sucks.
Before I switched over to digital, I had accepted jobs where they said, "Do you work digitally?" And I lied and said yes because I knew I could provide digital scans. So is that good to lie? I knew I'd lose it if I didn't.
It's always good to lie.
I don't know if that's
Is that a thing?
giving them what they want.
Yeah, that's not
They
a lie. I
weren't
mean,
wanting digital. They were wanting necessarily digital art. They were wanting digital delivery.
Well, and they assumed I did. They were like, "Well, so since you work digitally, I think it went down like that." And so I just kind of agreed.
Yeah, digital.
I didn't.
how much did you spend on scans? I mean, a true professional scan is so expensive. If you have a whole book to do, you're looking at a couple $1,000.
It was $500. So, but I didn't get drum scans. I got digital photographs with like a 12 megapixel camera. But it was about $500, and it was for the Frog with the Big Mouth book. That was when I was working in acrylic. But this is funny. I found someone who could print. Actually, it was the same guy, the same color house that did the scans. They could print on my Arches 140-pound hot press. So I did what I could in Photoshop, laying in the backgrounds to save time. And then had them print them on my watercolor paper, and then I put my texture gel over top of it and did the detail work.
Oh, but that's so smart.
But I didn't save that much time because I wasn't good enough in Photoshop to really save myself a lot of time. And then I had originals at the end, and then I had to get those scanned or had the pictures shot of them so I could send in the digital files. And I did it on my dime because my publisher wasn't, we're like, well, we just work with digital files. So,
hey, well, based on that process, couldn't you do something, going back to the idea of you having originals, couldn't you do some hybrid like that where you're printing out something and then one image? Because I've talking a conversation with David Hone about what makes an original. It's basically a piece of artwork that only exists in that form, right? So if you print something out midway and then finish it traditionally, doesn't that then become an original?
Oh, absolutely. I look at it that way. There's no way to get a print of it in its current form after you're finished with it. It only exists in that one spot. And I was doing a lot of painting on top of that print. It wasn't like from what I heard from Thomas Kincaid about him is that he would just do a few strokes, and I don't know if that's true or not. To me,
the highlights.
Yeah, it's kind of it's splitting hairs on. But mine were. I was spending a couple of days painting on these prints.
I mean, now you might want to think about doing that for your finish. We were talking earlier about having originals of your kind of crosshatch style. I just wonder.
Yeah, it's possible. I'm not as organized as you guys. You guys are workaholics.
Will's got a good work-life balance
I got
going on here.
Work-life balance that I don't want to mess
80-20 rule here. 20% work, 80% life.
He still gets stuff done, though.
I get it done.
Yeah, that's true.
I hate, going back to the idea of scans and all that stuff. I just hate the idea that something has been passed on to the artist. A cost has been passed on to the artist. That now we have to figure all this stuff out again, if you're working traditionally. But it's the one thing, if you guys are questioning, should I be digital or should I be traditional? It's the one area where I just love digital. If you have to submit final artwork to somebody else. And I used to paint, I don't know if you guys did like a varnish on top of your paintings or whatever, but it come time to photograph them, and all of a sudden you got all this shine everywhere, noise and hairs that got caught in the varnish is showing up, so you got to clean up the scan, and man, It's where Photoshop is, night and day better than traditional art. It's the only place I think it really shines over that.
Yeah. I actually, a few times that I visited the publishers out, New York, I would oftentimes see, less so lately, because so many artists either are working digitally or they have access to scanners and whatnot. But I would often see like originals accumulating in piles in these editors' office. And they're like, oh, you want to see this guy's original? And I'm like, yeah, let's check it out. And so I'm
that's
looking at
awesome.
the brush strokes and stuff. So they would actually mail them in and let the publisher worry about getting the reproductions that they wanted from it.
Yeah, that's what I always did when I was working traditionally. Just ship them all. I'd ship 20 or 30 paintings in one box and just cross your fingers that nothing happens to that box.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Terrifying.
Hey, Jake.
Yeah.
I have to ask questions that people on YouTube are going to be thinking because they can see you.
Oh, no.
But when you talk with your hands, I notice you have a scab on your right hand. I'm wondering how you got it. Yeah, on the heel of your hand. Is that not a scab down there?
Where?
Oh, you know what? It must have been just the angle.
Wrinkle?
It looked on the heel of your hand like.
Oh, right
Can we talk about the?
right
I
there.
thought you were gonna.
What's that?
It's just red from resting on the table.
Oh, don't do that. It's scary.
I thought you were going to bring up the portrait of Jake in the background.
That too. Like, why does he have a portrait
Why
of himself?
Why do you have a perfect photograph
like
of
he's
yourself?
some sort of dictator or something of art.
The portrait
Jake made
was
us
a
hang
gift.
those in our studio as well.
That hangs above the kitchen in his house. Like,
Listen,
all
if you
hail.
want a portrait of yourselves, you can contact my son, and he'll do it for your birthday. But he'll probably actually charge you
Jake's
too.
son, for those of you guys who can't see this, did a absolutely knockout perfect job of this portrait of Jake. I mean, it looks just like you. I mean, your head and that portrait are almost the same size on my screen, and I can't tell the difference.
Yeah, he did a really good job. I was so surprised.
It's incredible. How old is he?
14?
That's incredible. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
These kids are getting too good.
Yeah, he's my middle child. Forget his name, but he's pretty good at drawing.
You have a bunch of them, so that's understandable.
Honey, what's the middle child's name again?
Oh, I never went into the story about running from the police with my son the other day.
You got to do that sometime.
I'll do that one on the next one.
Yeah, that'll be for the bonus episode available only to subscribers. We'll do that.
Perfect. All right, that's going to wrap us up. I got some more questions, but they're all businessy stuff. I think we've covered enough.
Well, good.
Okay.
This was good.
Yeah,
It's
I'm cool
fun to
with
see what people are asking, because I remember being at the stage and wondering these very questions along the way.
Well, once it gets into specifics, you know what I mean? There's general advice, and then you get these weird little specifics, like what do you do when this, very, very specific kind of thing happen. I like it.
Yeah, it's very good. All right. Well, I'll take us out. Everybody, thank you for joining us here at 3 Point Perspective, and I hope you've had a good time. We certainly have had a good time. This podcast is made possible by SVSLearn.com, where becoming a great illustrator starts. And your hosts today have been Will Terry. You can find his artwork at willterry.com. And you can also follow him on Instagram at willterryart. Lee White, and you can find his work online at leewhiteillustration.com, and follow him on Instagram at leewhiteillo. And I'm Jake Parker. You can find my work at mrjakeparker.com, and follow me on Instagram at Jake Parker. Podcast is produced by Aaron Painter. You could find his work at painterdraws.com. Podcast edited by Alex Sugg. You can find his work at alexsugg.com. That's Sugg with 2 G's. And podcast video edited by Daniel 2. And you can find Daniel 2's work at daniel2.co, and 2 is spelled TU. And podcast and all social media is done by Lisa Fott here at svslearn.com. A special thanks to her. Now, if you like this episode and you felt like a couple of our answers were unsatisfactory, or you really thought we did a knockout job on some of these answers, you can.
That's what we did. Perfect.
You can log on to whatever your favorite podcast app is where you listen to these and leave a review, and we would really appreciate that. If not, you can go to the svslearn.com forums, where we have a thread devoted specifically to this podcast episode, and you can pipe in over there and let us know what you think. And I think that's it. Thanks, everybody, and we'll talk to you next time.